what narrative about power do you think needs to be reframed or challenged?
I think the narrative that it's okay for money to buy power is something we should all be challenging and pushing back hard against. I think we are currently in this kind of, it feels like a cycle where it's just almost overwhelming. We can see, in the United Kingdom, United States, around the world, where people who are, billionaires becoming autocratic politicians, people with huge wealth, not just buying access to politics, buying up media, closing down independent media. We can see this pattern over and over. And I think we've almost become normalised to that. We've become normalised to extreme inequality. We've become normalised to the idea that those who've got money can get whatever they want in this world. And I think really destabilising that, because I think at root that's one of the things that's driving so much discontent, political discontent, particularly in the West, is that. And I think if we could really start to show that that's really, that shouldn't be the case, that's not right, that I think would be really effective. I think too often we take it as read that it's okay for people who have money to be able to buy access, to buy power, and frankly at times even buy entire political systems.
Have you had any very powerful story or narrative that you've encountered recently that has helped you understand something very complex?
I've done a series of investigations recently looking around how tech billionaires influence the world. I did a big story about the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, which is a think tank set up by Tony Blair. And myself at Democracy for Sale and my colleagues at Democracy for Sale and also at Lighthouse Reports, we were looking at a guy called Larry Ellison, who's one of the world's richest men. And Larry Ellison has given more than £250 million to Tony Blair Institute. And we interviewed dozens of people current, former Tony Blair Institute staff, and we were interested in how Larry Ellison's money had changed the Tony Blair Institute. And what we found was that since this money came into this organisation, effectively, the goal of this organisation became more and more focused on AI and tech, it became more tech boosterish, and in some places effectively operating as a sales arm for Larry Ellison. And what I found so interesting about that story kind of helped crystallise for me how power is changing. You take somebody like Tony Blair, who's really famous around the world, almost he's probably the most famous British politician of the last 50 years. Someone whom doors open everywhere. But actually, compared to this guy, Larry Ellison, who most people don't know until recently, most people wouldn't have heard of, wouldn't be able to recognise, Larry Ellison's able to effectively buy somebody like Tony Blair. Tony Blair would reject that and say, I believe in these things, but effectively that's what's happening, in some level. And that I felt really helped me understand how power is changing and how power is moving from elected representatives and elected politicians to these handful of super rich people. And that process has been going on for quite a long time. It didn't just happen last year, it didn't just happen 10 years ago. In many respects it didn't even happen, it happened before the internet was even created. But I think stories like that are helping me to understand, even as I go along, how the people we think of as powerful often do not have that much power. And often as people, sometimes we don't even know and kind of pick up out from a lineup who have got real power.